This is Unit 3, Chapter 3, Philosophical Ethics in Business at Newberry College, Fall 2021. And there is a cold opening. Our CEOs paid too much compared to their employees. Who is paid too much? Who is paid too little? Who decides? What limitations are consistent with our economic and political values? And the philosophical ethics that we will discuss will be different types of theories that provide a framework for making ethical decisions. And we'll see that the answers that are given by those different philosophical theories can provide very different questions and very different answers uh, with respect to some of these issues that we face in business. Uh, so, uh, the remember that the first three units are just chapters 1 through 3, and then beginning in chapter 4, we begin to split some of the longer chapters. Once again, your chapter begins with a few quotes that introduce the chapter in a sentence or two. So you have Warren Buffett saying, "It's better to hang out with people better than you. Pick out associates whose behavior is better than yours, and you'll drift in that direction." And Warren Buffett is just a wellspring of great quotes. Think about that. If Michael Jordan was your older brother or best friend in the neighborhood, and you grew up playing with him one on one in the backyard, you'd be a pretty good basketball player. The same is true with ethical behavior. You're not only known by the company you keep, but keeping good company will make you a better person. Also, there's a quote from Henry Ford: "A business that makes nothing but money is a poor type of business." Now, Henry Ford was known in his time as a technocrat and a skinflint, but he had his good moments, and this was certainly one of them when he said this. He was passionate about creating a system which would most efficiently and economically provide basic personal transportation at an affordable price to consumers. That he got rich was just a byproduct of his true mission in life. And keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. Find your true mission in life, do it well, and the money will take care of itself. Or if it doesn't, find something to do that pays better, that is also true to your mission in life. I have to tell you, I don't see many ethical issues in the case of Dan Price, or many ethical lessons, rather, in the case of Dan Price and gravity payments, so I'm going to skip it. Dan used his position as majority owner to aggrandize himself and virtue signal to the nth degree while ignoring the interest of a key stakeholder, his own brother, and according to his ex-wife, behaving very badly with respect to her. I wish the authors hadn't chosen this example. There were certainly betters they could have chosen. Our chapter of objectives in Unit 3 are to explain the ethical framework of utilitarianism. Now, that's a $10 word, utilitarianism, so we're going to talk about what that means and describe how utilitarian thinking underlies economic and business decision making. We're going to explain how the free market is thought to serve the utilitarian goal of maximizing the overall good. We're going to explain some challenges to utilitarian decision making. We'll explain the principle based or rights based framework of ethics, explain the concept of human rights and how such rights are relevant to business, distinguish moral rights from legal rights, explain challenges to principle based ethics, and describe and explain the virtue based framework for thinking about ethical character. So watch out, there's a lot of objectives. The book begins by trying to organize the way we think about different ethical frameworks into three categories based on the values that the framework adopts as its key metrics. So, ethical frameworks, value systems. We look at consequences. How do we maximize measurable results for society? We look at principles. How do we support certain key values and principles such as fairness, equality, and equity? And we look at personal character. How do we take actions that are consistent with our standards of good behavior and decency? As you will see, these three ethical frameworks line up nicely with the three major value systems, or perhaps schools, of ethics uh, that we will discuss in this chapter: utilitarianism, rights based ethics, and value based ethics. All of them seem to all of them seek to explain how should we live our lives, using we to refer both to each of us individually and also to all of us as a group. While we're using some pretty heavy terminology in this chapter about philosophical questions, you'll find that most of this is just getting familiar with the $10 words that describe our everyday 1 cent thoughts. Penny for your thoughts? You will find in life that often you have to reason with a superior to get support for a decision you want your organization to make. You have to learn to speak and reason with decision makers in order to find support for your preferred course of action. Not everyone thinks the same way, and the ethical framework of the individual and the organization that you need to persuade matters in order to succeed in your argument. If you're trying to justify your reasoning using an ethical framework which doesn't match that of the boss, your coworkers, or the organization, then you're wasting your time. So, Unit 3 has some definitions on page 62. Utilitarianism, that's an ethical framework that tells us that we can determine the ethical significance of any action by looking at the consequences of that act. Utilitarianism is typically identified with the policy of maximizing the overall good, or in a slightly different version, of producing the greatest good for the greatest number. Principle based is one that makes decisions based on fundamental principles: justice, liberty, autonomy, fairness. Individual rights and duties are fundamental. It's also called rights based or deontological duty type ethics. Virtue based ethical theory is a theory based on the positive character traits or habits that constitute a good human life. What kind of person should I be, is the question it seeks to answer. So, utilitarianism is the ethical framework underlying capitalism and the free market economy. It's associated with political and social philosophers such as Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. And you can read about that in that part of the chapter. Principle based ethics focuses on the individual and certain fundamental rights and duties that we all have as human beings. Not all organizations, societies, or individuals agree upon the extent and composition of those fundamental rights. Utilitarianism in business. I'm now on page 66. Utilitarianism underlies traditional economic theory, with roots back to Adam Smith and his classic economic treatise, The Wealth of Nations. It emphasizes free market capitalism, maximizing the overall good for most people. It's similar to a cost-benefit analysis. Market equilibrium maximizes economic benefit. We learned in microeconomics, right? So note the definitions of consequentialist theories and egoism in passing through pages 64 to 66. There are other ways, some pejorative, in describing utilitarianism or its worldview. Your authors note two theories about how the free market maximizes economic benefit, and that's on the next slide. Two theories of benefit of the utilitarianism. There's the market, what I sometimes also refer to as microeconomics or conservatism view, and there's the administrative, or what sometimes I refer to as the macroeconomics or liberalism view of utilitarianism. The market method or theory emphasizes free and competitive markets, the invisible hand of the market, deregulation of industry, protecting private property, personal economic choices, and it promotes competition. The administrative theory relies on policy experts to make many choices. Administrators and bureaucrats establish regulations that promote reasonably anticipated consequences and it promotes healthy competition but deters destructive behavior. Uh, and on the market side, also called the microeconomic or conservative side, the focus is on the action of the invisible hand of the market in a free capitalist economy to allocate resources among members of society based upon their own personal choices in their own best interest. Advocates of this view promote policies of deregulation of industry, protecting private property, personal economic choices, and competition. The second school of utilitarianism believes that in a complicated modern society, policy experts from law, economics, and other social sciences can establish regulations as passed and enacted democratically to promote reasonably anticipated beneficial consequences. The second school of thought, which is the basis of most macroeconomic policy and liberal economic thought, supports the modern administrative state and bureaucracy. Challenges to utilitarianism. How do you consider the interests of all stakeholders? How do you measure costs and benefits, especially long term social costs, such as environmental damage? And do the ends, the consequences, really justify the means? Isn't that something we really think of as not being ethical? Can these challenges be addressed by the rules of the game? Long term environmental damages may be impossible to quantify or even predict today from fossil fuels or nuclear risks. Protecting large organizations from failure, too big to fail, may retard long term economic growth and the market's reallocation of resources to more efficient operators, who are often smaller. Who's famous for saying the ends justifies the means? Machiavelli, right? By any means necessary. Isn't that Antifa and the anarchists? How are these philosophies and practices ethical? Can legal or other ethical restraints avoid the excesses of Machiavellianism and the anarchist radicals? Let's move on now to principle-based or rights-based ethical frameworks. This is on pages 71 to 75. When should a principle outweigh our desire to produce beneficial consequences? Principles are ethical rules that put values into action. Duties are obligations that one is bound to perform regardless of consequences. Ethical duties, some of them are categorical imperatives, like the Hebrew national hot dog slogan: we answer to a higher authority. No ifs, ands, or buts. The pun is intended there. It's either kosher or it isn't. No exceptions. Your authors suggest Arthur Andersen might have made a better decision to disclose their fraudulent accounting practices at Enron earlier, even though it would have reduced the fees it received from Enron, one of its biggest clients, and also possibly led to damages against Arthur Andersen for its role in setting up the SPEs that hid the costs and liabilities. Similarly, Volkswagen's engineers should have programmed its emissions control and detection devices to work accurately rather than attempt to defeat the emissions regulations, even though it would have cost more and reduced VW's profits. I like to think of categorical imperatives as the Hebrew national hot dog motto: no ifs, ands, or buts. It always makes me smile, and it always makes me a little hungry. In 2009, a patron at Shawarma King Kosher Deli in Brooklyn spotted a worker cooking hot dogs from a ballpark beef frank package on the grill with other kosher meats, and a ruckus began in the deli, with the patron screaming that the deli had violated kosher law, which not only says no pork but also requires that the beef be slaughtered and processed in accordance with Jewish law and under the supervision of appropriate rabbis for the process. In short, no meat south of the on-ramp for the intestine, and the deli had violated the most important categorical imperative when it tried to serve non-kosher meat. More about principles and rights-based theories. Human rights and duties, where do they come from? There's the Declaration of Independence, the Bible comes from God, the UN Declaration of Human Rights from universal legislation, fundamental right to autonomy. Kant and the philosophers were free and rational beings. Human rights and social justice, two systems. This is on pages 79 to 80. You have liberty and equal opportunity, the capitalist system. You have equality of outcome, the socialist system. Human rights and legal rights. Human rights can be natural rights, moral rights. Legal rights are ones that come from legislation and contracts. As you can see, there's a lot of disagreement over which principles apply. Uh, how broad is the scope of rights that we apply, and what is the source of those rights? There are also disagreements over how and when those rights can be enforced. Challenges to an ethics of rights and duties. Which rights and duties apply? What is the source and authority of those rights and duties? Is it the Bible, the Declaration of Independence, a UN declaration, or some other standard? Rights versus goals. Are the rights claimed simply social goals that one hopes to achieve? Is there really a right to health care? Is there a right to an education? What are the scope and range of those rights? How broad are they? And is there a hierarchy of rights? With all these expansive rights, which ones trump the other? With respect to virtue ethics, this is described toward the end of the chapter at pages 81 through 87. It's based on integrity and character, virtues and vices, and it gets into the old Greek theory of virtues and vices. To the Greeks, you had courage, moderation, wisdom, and justice. Christians, faith, hope, and charity. Boy Scouts, they had their trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent, that sort of thing. So, vices, you can find those in the Ten Commandments, the seven deadly sins. In Buddhism, there were 10 bonds and 98 proclivities. In the Quran and the Islamic scholars, the seven censures, the prohibited acts. When does self interest become greed? If you look at page 85, Milan's EpiPen, or think about the movie Wall Street, is greed ever good? Isn't greed self-correcting with additional competition or perhaps social shaming? Character. Character is a sum of traits, dispositions, and habits of a person. Real virtues. Can virtue be taught, learned? Is it nurture or nature? And then think about this question. What will they say about you after after you die? What will people remember you for? Watch out, though, when you think about virtues and vices. Beware of mere virtue signaling, substituting for real virtue. Is it truly ethical behavior, or is it the work of PR and marketing flats? Well, that's it for Chapter 3 and Unit 3. The next time we will get into Chapter 4 and do the first half of a very long and important chapter. Until then, have a great day, and we'll see you soon.